Hello everyone, welcome to this week's GT Sport Daily Race C race review. A little bit later in the week than usual due to be working night shift. But of course we're on the Super Formula cars, the Honda variation, and we're at the Red Bull Ring. And in the races we're going to sort of take a look at here, I was trying to make things a little bit more interesting. So the race settings for this one on the screen, we have tyre at times 10, fuel at times 3, 15 laps to get round. And we'll go into the race details. We'll take a look at the tyre stipulation, and the tyre requirement is that we must run both the hard tyres and the medium tyres, so the non-stop was not an option for this one. The strategy was pretty much, well, it was a one-stop. The two-stop was a little bit slower than the one-stop, and the sort of medium tyres lasted around 10-11 laps, and depending on where you started on the grid, you would either start on the mediums if you were near the front, do 10-11 laps onto the hards at the end if you were towards the rear of the grid, or you were, I guess, confident in your pace. You would start on the hard tyres, do 4 to 5 laps, maybe even a few more than that depending on how the traffic was looking, and then finish the race on the quicker tyre. So we join the car on board here in pre-qualifying for the race. Our current best time is a 1 minute 13.7, nothing spectacular, but we're on a much quicker lap here. And this is actually going to be my fastest lap that I've done so far this week. So coming out of turn number 3, Slosh Gold, down towards turn 4, can't remember the name of it, 4th gear for this one, not a great apex there, but on the power nice and early, into the left hand curve here, getting on the power as early as you can. You can see we're purple there by quite a margin, so I knew I was on a fairly good lap here. And of course, very easy to ruin a good lap into these last two turns by extending the track limits, but we take our time, we keep it nice and neat and tidy, and we're going to come over the line for a 1 minute 13.457. 457. So let's move on to race number 1, and that time we've seen there was good enough to put us in pole position for this one. So for these races we're going to be on my Oceania account, Womble Skipper, building up some DR to make sure we're in those top split FIA races. So this one is of course a grid start with full start check. You want to have traction control to get the car off the line. There we go, red lights are out, we're off and away. Traction control off as soon as the wheel spin stops, radar on, and we can see we've lost the lead into turn number 1. Japanese driver there, I suspect using some boost to get such an advantage. And we made a little bit of contact there. I think there's maybe a little bit of desync. Obviously our connection is not absolutely perfect when we're racing in this region, and that made us go wide into turn number 1. Now this opening lap here is going to be an absolute mess. Coming into turn number 2 there, Remus, you can see we went too deep on the brakes as well. We're already nearly a second behind Loving Car there, the Japanese driver. We've got a bit of a gap to third place into turn number 4 here. Again, not threatening the apex, just not hooking the car up at all. Usually I would make the excuse that I sort of jump into these races without too much practice or too much time on in the car, but I can't really pull that one out for this one because you just see me doing qualifying there. I had done about 8 or 9 laps. Possibly just the fact that the car does feel quite different in qualifying, I could maybe use that as a little bit of an excuse, but this opening lap here has been pretty awful, that's for sure. The driver ahead of me there, he seems to be doing this race an awful lot. I knew he was going to have a bit of trouble beating him, even though we did start in pole position. He seems to be very fast in the race. But the opening lap is now complete. A very, very poor opening lap of course, and we're just about to make things a whole lot worse by picking up this world famous penalty. Running a little bit wide out of turn 1 at the Red Bull Ring. You kind of bait your breath, close your eyes and hope that that little red bar and yellow bar doesn't appear. Unfortunately we managed to accumulate a half-second penalty, and that was really any chance of winning this race was down the pan with that one. We sort of kept the Japanese driver fairly honest up to about lap number 12, actually started to close the gap as the tyres wore. Then we were on to the hard tyres. We made a mistake out of the hairpin, and we pretty much gave up, to be honest with you, at that point. Just brought the car home in second place. But that was race number 1. Let's see if that was enough of a warm up to see if we can do a little bit better in the next one. So here is the lineup for race number 2. That one 13.457, still good enough to put us on pole position ahead of our fellow Australian, which I'm saying in air quotes, Corey Hack. I've raced that chap a few times in some of the FIA races. So let's see if we can kind of cement that pole position a little bit better than we did in the last race and get into turn 1 in the lead. So pretty much the same procedure, a little bit better at getting the traction control off and getting the power down. Fire onto the radar and I can see that we're going to get into turn 1 in first position. Go a little bit deep there, but just because it's the first lap you can go a little bit wide in turn 1 and not get a penalty because it's not really calculated whether you're gaining an advantage based on a previous lap. But we managed to cement that pole position there, kind of get a little bit of a tap into the hairpin, which is why we run wide. To be fair to the driver that hit me, I believe he kind of came off the throttle and let us regain that lead, so all good. And down towards Slosh Goals, looks like we're sort of comfortably got that pole position cemented now into the lead. I'm going to jump forward here to lap number 4, and you can see we've built up a 3.7 second lead. As the cars, I think, more behind than anything else, were getting themselves or maybe tripping over each other more than anything. So at this point I decided I would try and make things a little bit more interesting and go for a bit of a weird 2-stop strategy. I think we could have probably won this one fairly comfortable from that position. So into the pits we'll dive at the end of lap 4. We'll fast forward through that process. We've fired on the racing hard tyres. We'll do a couple of laps on these tyres and we'll come back in for the mediums and finish on the quicker tyre and see if we can still win this race from that position, or will we live to regret that? Let us find out. So go forward here to lap number 6. We're actually on our second lap on the hard tyres. We've caught up with P4 here in a nice 19 sort of or late 80s, early 90s McLaren livery. One of the best thing about the Super Formula cars is the liveries of the sort of classic Formula 1 cars. But I can see this driver is probably going to hold us up a little bit, so we'll now dive into the pits and put on another set of medium tyres. So this is our second pit stop, only on lap number 6. A very unusual way to go about this race. But as I said, try to make things a little bit more interesting than some of the, well, the majority of the races I've been doing in this one have been fairly lonely experiences, usually in the top 3. So I was looking for a little bit of action. Out the pits we come here. I could see we were just ahead of a car behind us. I think that's around about 3/10. So we're on the boost up into the hairpin here. It should be no problem to sort of break at our normal point and get around this corner. We can see on the radar there that we have been dived into the hairpin. Back on the boost again, we managed to get ahead of both those cars on the run down to Slosh Gold. I thought we had it pretty much cemented here, but again, watch that radar. Yep. I actually broke very late for that corner as well, maybe at about 80 metres, so I was probably going to run a little bit deep, but it was just to kind of try and give myself a bit of a safety net from the cars behind, but it turned out that it wasn't quite enough, and we were to get punted off the track, and that was going to absolutely ruin our race from that point. So let's look at what happened. This is the first instant into the hairpin. This driver, believe it or not, is actually on the hard tyres as well. Goes for the inside of the car, or my car. Actually, wasn't quite as much of a dive as I thought at the time of racing, but still a pretty silly move on that driver's behalf. Both me and P7 there get much better traction off the corner, and I didn't realise at the time when I was put into the gravel that it was actually the driver that hit me had actually been punted into. So 2 instances caused by that driver there, and as I said, pretty much ruined our race, put us down in 10th position here that we're in now, but at the very least we have got the faster tyres on and we're going to the end, so probably a strong possibility that we can make up a few positions as the race progresses. So who are we going to pick off first? Well, for fast forwarding here to lap number 8, we've caught up with P7 and 8 who are having a little bit of a battle down into turn number 5 here, allowing us to catch up nice and easily. We need to get the moves done quickly here, we can't afford to be getting held up. The dirty air, letting the car understeer a little bit wide there, having to come off the throttle to avoid contact with the rear of P8 here, but we're going to go for a bit of a savage dive into the second to last turn, but we make the apex. There is a little bit of contact, but I think it was more that driver turning into me than anything else. Yeah, it was a little bit of a dive, but at this point I cannot afford to take any prisoners in these moves. I've got to try and make up for that punt. So up into P number 5 now. I think a card served a penalty, and we're back behind the driver in the McLaren livery that we sort of dived into the pits behind. So getting a run down towards turn number 1 here, a bit of a strange incident again. I think maybe my connection was to blame. There's a bit of contact, and it looks like we give that driver a 2-second penalty. Now, I did feel pretty bad about that, but again I think it was just to do with obviously the connection being a little bit of maybe desync. Well, I did feel sorry for that driver up until this point when they went for a pretty ridiculous dive up the inside into Remus. So I had no idea whether that was maybe an attempt to take me out because they're a bit angry with the 2-second penalty. But you can see from the replay here just how far back they come. Thankfully we've seen it on the radar. We're just able to delay our turn in and drive off into the distance. So yeah, I do apologise for giving that driver a 2-second penalty, but I felt a little bit less bad when I seen that dive from him. But that was as high as we were to get though in this one. P number 4, the top 3 drivers, all reasonably quick, similar pace to me. Really couldn't make that much of a dent into the lead that they'd built up, courtesy of that punt. So yeah, we pretty much threw that one away in all honesty. We probably had the win pretty easily after about 4 laps, but we decided to try and make things interesting and paid the price for it, I guess, with that punt into the gravel down at Slosh Gold. So moving on to the next race here, and we're actually going to join this one a third of the way through on lap number 5. And this one was quite an interesting strategic battle between me and the driver in P2 there, the Hong Kong based driver. We'll just call him John for the duration of this race. So I'd raced that driver in a number of races all before this one. I knew the strategy that he was doing was to start on the hard tyres and finish on the mediums. And they seemed to be very quick, certainly seemed to have a little bit of a pace advantage over me. Now, we've opened up a bit of a gap here over these first 6 laps due to the fact that we're on the medium tyres versus that driver's hard tyres. And then they've had a little bit of an incident on lap number 6 there, which has cost them 2 or 3 seconds. So we've opened that gap up to over 8 seconds as we come to the end of lap number 7. Now, I knew that they were going to be finishing the race on mediums and it was going to be pretty close whether they would be closing me down. So I thought we'd try something a little bit different and go for a 2-stopper because they'd had that little excursion into the gravel. So at the end of lap 7 we're going to pit here and bolt on a new set of mediums, and you can see that Hong Kong driver John has also pitted, and he indeed was on the hard tyres. So we're both now pitted for a new set of mediums, and it's a bit of a strategy battle to the end. That driver is going to the end without stopping, and I still need to stop one more time to put on the mandatory hard tyres. Now we've got a driver in between us at the moment, a Malaysian driver, so we're not entirely sure what the gap is at this point. We do know from the strategy guide that we needed just over 7 seconds to make a pit stop and come out in front of another car. So coming to the end of our first flying lap on the new tyres here, we're going to set the fastest lap of the race. As I said, we don't have an indication of the gap to John here, but what I was looking out for here was, did John set the fastest lap? And indeed he did. He sets a 1:14.3 versus a 1:14.5 for myself. So he's starting to close that gap down by a couple of attempts on that lap. We'll go purple into the first sector on our lap number 10 here. It's just a case of sort of putting in really good sort of mid 1 minute 14 here to try and keep that gap to John. So a 1:14.4, we go slightly quicker on our second flying lap on the new medium tyres, and the Malaysian driver pits, so we now get an idea of what that gap is, and it's 7.7 seconds. And John also set a new fastest lap on that one as well, a 1:14.2. So he's gaining by a couple of tenths a second per lap, and we're going to have to try and keep that gap up over 7 seconds. Now it was looking very, very close, and on lap 14 here we slowed the footage down. Doesn't look to me like we went wide on turn number 1, and I was very surprised when this half-second penalty popped up at the absolute worst possible time. And by the time we serve that penalty, that's going to cost us around about a second and a half, and it kind of ruined what was looking like a pretty epic finish, because I suspect we'll be going down towards the hairpin side by side on the last lap, and it's just going to be a case of who could be the bravest on the brakes. But unfortunately that kind of finish has been denied by a fairly silly mistake on my part. Didn't really look like a penalty to me. I've watched it a couple of times. but we all know that sort of turn on the Red Bull ring can be a little bit of a lottery. You can see that gap there. I think it's sitting at around about 6.5 seconds. I think John actually made a mistake on this lap as well. But that's not going to be enough of a gap to get into the pits, make a pit stop and get out in front. So into the pits we come here at the end of lap 14 for those mandatory hard tyres. Hard tyres selected. Yeah, I was really gutted at this point, really disappointed, because I was really looking forward to seeing what was going to happen as we came out the pits here, whether we could maintain that lead and have a battle over the last lap. And unfortunately, because of that small mistake from myself, we've been denied that. So out the pit lane we come here. There's John overtaking us into turn 1. The gap there about 8/10 of a second. Obviously they got a little bit more momentum out of turn 1 towards the hairpin, up to 1 second by the time we get to the braking zone. So they've been very, very close indeed over the course of this last lap. John on kind of warm mediums and me on fresh hards. I think the pace would have been pretty similar. We would have had a good battle to see who could pick up the win. Well, in this instance, John has had better pace than me, and he's going to pick up the victory. Half a lap to go now, and couldn't quite cement any of those pole positions into a victory. Partly my own fault from trying some different stuff, not really trying the sort of traditional strategies, just having a little bit of fun on this account, to be perfectly honest with you. And in all honesty, I'm not a huge fan of the combination. I'm really finding the dirty air pretty hard to put up with when following another car close behind, which has kind of been ruining the races for me just a little bit. However, hopefully I've managed to provide you with some entertainment in this video. Hopefully you're having some fun on this race yourself. If you're doing it, you're not finding the dirty air as much of a nightmare as what I am. But all that's left to be said is please hit that like button, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And until the next video, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you on the next one. Goodbye now.